This is the first day of this August-September 1982 7-day sesshin. Over the past years we've read from many writings and we've actually used many books over and over again. So in this sesshin we'll see how it goes. We'll leave these writings aside and use some koans. We have done a few of those in Teisho outside of sesshin. The first one taken today being the second koan from the Mumon Kan called Hyakujo and the Fox. The particular translation being used and may be modified is from the book called Comments on the Mumon Kan by Zenkai Shibayama. If we do use comments by Zenkai Shibayama, we will say so. Koans, maybe for some of you who are not particularly familiar with this, are sayings of mostly ancient masters, people working in Zen, teachers with students, or students among each other, these students usually being monks. The dates are usually the 9th and 8th century, sometimes the 10th. I'm not too good on history. Don't want to look it up now and lose time over that. The period in which most koan originated was called the Tang period in China. Actually, if one tries to visualize how did these take place, this was a lively occurrence. It didn't take place rehearsed and staged so that we today could use these things. It occurred on the instant, a saying, a doing, a question, an answer, maybe another question and a response. And that was that. Because it was a spontaneous occurrence relating to that particular instant, particular people involved, there are Zen teachers who don't bother with koans. They say this is past history. Bankei calls them old wives' tales. Because I need to speak about fundamental things, not fascinate you people with these old wives' tales. Well, other schools of Zen base their whole training on studying koan. A koan may have a very traditional setting, which may make a person believe that you need to be in that traditional setting to understand the koan. That would only be to understand the traditional setting, but a koan, in most cases, doesn't want you to understand a traditional setting. Or rather, the people who compiled these, because as we said before, when these utterances were made, there was no thought of you today. There was no thought. A free response. And usually if it was a monk working hard, a very bothered question, a burning question. A koan, as it is put, very often points to something beyond itself that cannot be put into any which form, however unique. So to really understand the koan rather than appreciate its beauty or its eloquence or the setting or the words, the poeticalness of it, if it is a poetical koan, or the humor of it, if there's some humor in it. To understand what this koan is really pointing to, there must be that same state within oneself, putting it coarsely. And can a koan, questioning a koan, penetrating a koan, looking into a koan, bring this about? And yet also a koan lends itself to talking about a lot of things. And maybe this is the way it'll turn out that we will use it. I don't know. Let's make a start here. This is incidentally the longest koan that I'm aware of, because it's put in the form of a story. In this collection that was made by a Zen teacher called Mumon Khan, the Gateless Gate in English, there is the case itself, supposedly the happening. Even there, we got to take this with a grain of salt, because as many translations and versions that I've looked at of koans, they always differ. Sometimes it seems as though one version is exactly the reverse of the other. And of course, interpretations, there are as many as there are interpreters. So, in a koan, one must always go beyond translation and beyond interpretation. Whenever Master Hyakujo gave Teisho on Zen, an old man sat with the monks to listen, and always withdrew when they did. For you just enter this whole scenario, as we say these days. Just enter this whole scene that is being described for you. One day, however, he remained behind, and the master asked, "Who are you standing here before me?" The old man replied, "I am not a human being. In the past, in the time of the Kasho Buddha, I was the head of this monastery. Once a monk asked me, 'Does an enlightened man also fall into causation or not?' A monk asking the abbot of this monastery, 'Does an enlightened man also fall into causation or not?' And I replied, 'He does not.' Because of this answer, I was made to live as a fox for 500 lives. Because of this answer, I was made to live as a fox for 500 lives. Now I beg you, please say the turning words. Turning words in Zen phraseology means say something that will open this closed mind so I can see something. He's called turning words. Now I beg you, please say the turning words on my behalf and release me from the body, from the fox body. The old man then asked Hyakujo, "Does an enlightened man also fall into causation or not?" And the master said, "He does not ignore causation." Hearing this, the old man was at once enlightened. Making a bow to Hyakujo, he said, "I have now been released from the fox body which will be found behind the mountain. I dare to make a request of the master, please bury it as you would a deceased monk." The master had the Ino strike the gavel, the Ino must be the gavel striker, and announced to the monks that there would be a funeral for a deceased monk after the midday meal. The monks wondered, saying, we're all in good health. There's no sick monk in the Nirvana hall. The sick hall being called for the monks Nirvana hall. What is it all about? After the meal, the master led the monks to a rock behind the mountain, poked out a dead fox with a staff and cremated it. In the evening, the master ascended the rostrum in the hall and told the monks the whole story. Obaku was sort of in the position of the head monk there. Obaku we know here from the Chinese name of Huangpo. We do read quite a bit, have read quite a bit from Huangpo, usually on the 7th day of Sesshin. It's called The Transmission of the Mind. Obaku thereupon asked, the old man failed to give the correct turning words when he said, no, doesn't fall into causation, when he said that to this inquiring monk. So Obaku says, the old man failed to give the correct turning words and was made to live as a fox for 500 lives. You say, if however, for 500 lives you say. However, if his answer had not been an incorrect one each time, what would he have become? If he had answered correctly, said the right thing, then what would he have become? In one case he became a fox here, according to your fine story. Had said the right thing, what would he have become? The master said, come closer to me, I'll tell you. Obaku then stepped forward to Hyakujo and slapped him. The questioner slapped Hyakujo. Hyakujo said, come here, I'll tell you. Master laughed aloud, clapping his hands, and said, I thought a foreigner's beard is red, but I see that it is a foreigner with a red beard. It may sound very strange. A lot of koan sounds strange because we are not immersed in Chinese legend, mythology, history. The foreigner with a red beard usually refers to Bodhidharma. Coming from India, Bodhidharma is used as a symbol for the truth, clarity, no illusion. Had a red beard. So here, Hyakujo says, I thought a foreigner's beard is red, but I see that it's a foreigner with a red beard. Saying, I see Bodhidharma here someplace, of course. What he's saying, what is he saying? Beyond all these formulations and symbols. We'll come back to this koan, but we'll read Mumon's commentary, which he writes for every koan, and then his poem, called a poem. Sometimes one wonders why is it called a poem, but that's the name given to this particular last word of Mumon's to a koan. The commentary says, quote, not falling into causation, unquote. Not falling into causation, which was the response of the abbot for the enlightened man. Why was he turned into a fox? And again in quotes, not ignoring causation. Why was he released from the fox body? If you have an eye to see through this, then you will know that the former head of the monastery did enjoy his 500 happy lives, blessed lives, it says, as a fox. And the poem, not falling, not ignoring, Odd and even are on one die. Die. Crap, isn't that another word you use? One of those things that you throw? Twos or snake eyes or six. Not falling, not ignoring, odd and even are on one die. Not ignoring, not falling, hundreds of thousands of regrets. We'll get to all of this and talk about it. Maybe first of all we should talk about this general form that this koan takes, that Hyakujo chose to do that morning. Actually, Hyakujo himself, before he became an abbot and a teacher, once walked through the fields with his teacher, whose name was Baso. And there was, one koan says, one wild goose, another koan says, a whole flock of wild geese flying overhead. If you live in this area, or maybe in Canada too, any place, I don't know, where all these geese come and go. At certain times of the year, there's just a whack, 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 whack. The whole sky is filled with the sound of the geese. These beautiful V-shaped streams. Orderly, but not completely orderly. They may descend on a vast field and you hardly see them. Between the corn stubs. A car comes by or a shot is fired by a hunter, they just rise as one. And Baso asked Hyakujo, "What are these? What are these?" pointing to the sky. And Hyakujo said immediately, "These are wild geese." And Hyakujo said, "Where are they going to?" And Baso said, "Where are they going to?" And Hyakujo replied, "They have flown away." At this, Baso grabbed Hyakujo's nose and wrenched it. It was painful. Hyakujo gave out a scream. And with this, his mind was open. Where's this car gone to? Or maybe we should start saying, what is it? Listen. Hyakujo told a story. Doesn't seem to be any dispute among books that I've read that this is a made-up story. To me, there's no question about it. Why does he choose to tell it in a story form? I don't know. We're all fascinated by stories. Particularly if these stories have something fascinating in them, like reincarnation, which particularly we now in the West, where this is coming newly to us, are very fascinated by it. Because it's not quite new. The idea of past lives is an old idea here too. People who have this clairvoyance backward to see what one was in the Middle Ages, a knight or a maiden committing a crime of passion or something. I'm not inventing these things. People tell me that. What has happened, or what people have told them happened in their former lives. which is a fascination away from the mundaneness and agony and boredom of this everyday life. So maybe Hyakujo uses a story so that there will be sort of enthusiastic listening. But the story form must be transcended. Or rather, let's put it this way. When one is fascinated by a story, somebody tells one something, it sounds fascinating, can one immediately question this fascination? Where does it come from? What's the ingredients of it? Why? Not so much explaining as looking. It reveals itself if one looks very objectively, with an inquiring mind that is not biased, pro or against. This story taking up this old Indian belief in reincarnation, which was also taken over by the Buddhists. Reincarnation is called rebirth. Although the Buddha said emphatically that there is no soul, there is nothing that reincarnates or that is reborn. And to see that there is no individual, separate, isolated entity is the gist of this whole work. So let's beware of creating it again someplace and attaching our hopes to that, which is an escape from the real work that needs to be done. To face all these images one has of oneself, of past, present, and future lives. The old man saying to Hyakujo, long ago in the age of so-and-so Buddha, which means before the historical Buddha, which means unthinkably long ago. But when you can't think of time anymore, it means no time. Because time is thinking. When you can't think of time, there's no time. So this story applies right now. To you and me. See it that way. And don't have something out there distant to contemplate or think about. Then it will be not helpful at all. I was the head of this monastery, and some monk came to me and said, doesn't enlightened man also fall into causation or not? Several things to talk about concerning this one sentence. First being the enlightened man, or enlightened woman for that matter. In this tradition it's always about men, mostly almost about men. That's the tradition. Western tradition isn't any different, mostly. Can one be free of tradition? Free man, free woman, not bound by these traditional images of manhood and womanhood, and feel freely, live profoundly, not image-ridden, acquiring images, destroying images, only to acquire another one in its place. So the enlightened person, let's say. What is that? Who is he or she? Calls for a definition. There have been definitions given or descriptions. I think Shibayama himself someplace. Yeah, here's something. The man of real freedom, he says here, he doesn't say the enlightened man. The man of real freedom would be one who lives in peace in whatever circumstances cause and effect bring about. Whether the situation be favorable or adverse, he lives it as the absolute situation with his whole being. That is, he is causation itself. With which he may mean no separation from circumstances. He never dualistically discriminates different aspects of the situation. His heart is never disturbed by any outside elements. When he lives like this, he is the master of cause and effect, and everything is blessed as it is. The eternal peace is established. Here, this is the indescribable spiritual happiness a Zen man enjoys. I have to be careful with all such descriptions. Very, very careful. Let people write them who wish to write them, but as you read them, beware. You already create an image and what you're aspiring for, and what you think somebody who you think or have been told is enlightened is like. And if you have an image of a person, you don't see what that person is like. You can't. You see the image. And everything this person does is tainted or tinted by this projected image of what you've read and has become engraved in your brain, which bars free seeing, clear seeing. Enlightenment means there is no me. So how can one say I am enlightened? There's no me. Who is to say that? It's the absence of all these conditionings, traditional and otherwise, that allows clarity of seeing and thinking and feeling and relating. And embracing. Understanding what was said yesterday in the opening talk, that I am all of you and you're all of me. This inseparableness of all humankind. Now in doing this Zen work, traditional called Zen training, or not doing Zen work, there are moments in human beings' lives where there is no me, where there's clarity. The walls break down. There's no inside and outside. And it's so simple, so self-evident. Sometimes this experience, if we want to give it that name, lasts very briefly. And then what happens? Then the brain habitually starts working on it. It becomes a memory which one starts to relish. Try to bring back this thing. How did I do that? The fact is you didn't do anything. That is not how the mind habitually works. What did I do? How can I do this again? Or else images arise. I am now a person with kensho or enlightenment or whatever you want to call it, and therefore I'm different. Or other people may see you this way, if a lot is made of it and talked about. So can this all be seen if it arises? Not as a theoretical argument, but as it arises directly in oneself, to see it, to look into it, see through it. This monk, coming to this abbot, why does he ask this question? Doesn't enlightened man still fall under causation? Why would you ask this question? You yourself are laboring, trying to become this enlightened man, because you've heard so much about it. You're no good monk unless you're enlightened. What am I doing all this for? Does it really mean that when I reach this goal, this state there, someplace in the future, not realizing at that moment that this future is part of the process of my thinking, when I reach that, then will I be done with all problems? Then will nothing befall me anymore? Will it be worth all this effort? I'm speculating a little bit on what this monk thinks, but maybe something like this is going on in his mind. Then will I be out of the soup? Does he still fall under causation or not? Is what he's asking. You see all that's going on, the image of the enlightened man and wanting something to happen to the enlightened man, something hopeful. Unless you think it's a sheer theoretical interest, but I doubt it. These people that were really working hard, just as we do here, sitting, inquiring, questioning, falling back, frustration, despair, not being able to do this thing. Causation. What is meant by causation? I think the way it was put by the Buddha at one time, if you want to know what was in the past, look at how you're now. Because whatever you're doing right now, that's the totality of all the past is acting, thinking, sitting right now. But if you want to know what you're going to be in the future, look at what you're now, what you're doing right now. And as you sow, what you're doing right now. Implying as you sow, so you will reap. Because there's this whole field of physical causation, which I think it would be good to keep separate from this. A brick falling from a house and hitting your head and you having a gash in your head or in your scalp there needing stitches, blood flowing. I don't know whether the monk was asking that even, if the enlightened man could be exempt from that. Maybe he was wondering about that too, but for clarity's sake and for understanding ourselves, let's leave the physical occurrences aside. Supposing we're working together, you and I. I don't mean here in Doksan or so. Let's say in an office. And this morning you come in and there's nothing friendly about the way you look or the way you sound. I say something friendly to try to sort of break things up a little bit, and boom, some very impolite or moody, unfriendly remark, or just the expression of the face, which seems to say to me, I don't like you, I don't like anybody. How does one respond to that? Really, how this is answered answers this whole question of causation. Does this behavior become a cause for me? A cause for resentment? A cause for counterattack? A cause for deep hurt? For a change in mood? If it does, that is causation. This caused now my bad mood, and this in turn I'm going to snap at somebody else too. All of this is observable for anybody by anybody. Or is it possible, yeah, something arises, you want to hit back, you want to lash out, but there's a tension. You're doing this work. This is your life work. A work really of inquiry. What's really going on? Not just in that person. We're very free and easy to do that, to quickly analyze that person. What happened to him or her? What's wrong with him or her? What the causes of that are? This is really actually an escape from our own dilemma of not being able to face this. This relationship with this person. So if there's attention, seeing all that comes up and wanting to explain that person away rather than looking at the hurt that is beginning to manifest itself, or the anger that comes up, the frustration, or how unfair. I haven't done a thing to him. Why is he treating me like this? If there's attention, really a thoroughgoing attention, like lightning which goes right to the root of a tree, breaks it asunder, then maybe that cause will never become a cause, because there will be no effect here. Because in this energy of attention, effects dissolve, as do causes. Is this something one can work with, look into? Every moment of one's life, it's possible. Not that one does it every moment of one's life. Before one knows it, boom, a cause has become an effect. And then one has to start eating it up. One has said something oneself, one regrets it, there's remorse, that's a new effect. And the remorse itself becomes a cause to further actions, repentance, confession, or whatever one chooses to do to relieve oneself of this ill feeling. Or can attention set in? No escape into any kind of schemes, reliefs, but attention of what's going on. It takes energy. It is energy. It's a vastness of energy. The abbot replied, he does not. The enlightened man does not fall into causation. Let's look for a moment at this response by this abbot. Here a person asks him, and immediately, no, he doesn't. It doesn't say he paused for a moment even. Or I paused for a moment. He doesn't say, wait a minute, let me sit on that. I've never really thought about it. I never really looked into that. That's a good question. Where do our replies come from when they come instantly? And I'm not taking the case that there's such freedom from memory that a reply is just there. One knows not where from. We're excluding that at the moment. So where does this? No, he doesn't. Where does it come from? Wouldn't it very likely come from what this abbot has read, heard, or wants to believe himself? He may very well have had kensho, whatever it's called in Chinese. But if he looked into himself, he would give a different answer to this monk. Instead, he's speaking from memory, from tradition, although one can question whether this is traditionally stated any place. Although traditionally there are here and there descriptions of what the enlightened man is like, just like what I've read to you. Which is a little ideal thing there. So the response comes in words from memory. A phrase out of what one already knows. And as he continues here, he says, because of this answer, I was made to live as a fox for 500 lives. Now one can look at this in different ways. You can try to imagine, well, what really happened? Well, did he live out his life, or did he drop dead at this moment in some place? A fox mother gave birth to a litter of foxes, and one of them was this abbot. Sometimes, in what I've read, this is used, this you may be born as such and such, is used as a threat or an intimidation by some Zen teachers. Which, of course, is a ridiculous method, because all it leads us to intimidation, and then one follows something very strictly and rigidly, and there's no seeing or understanding in that. It starts to control oneself because one doesn't want to be a fox or a maggot, I've heard once, or has been the threat of that, or some other such animal that we are conditioned to despise or feel, ugh. So if you're given a threat, if this is a method of training, then you start controlling yourself if you don't want to become that. And of course what happens when you start controlling yourself is you also start controlling others, because what you do should also apply to other people. And the whole scene is set for control and controlling thought and action. Examples of which abound in the history of religions. Just taking the Inquisition as one, burning people for what they say, profess, or write, which is divergent from the Mother Church. So here the abbot in this story says, I was reborn as a fox. What's a fox? Incidentally, when you read things, whatever you read, something like this, or when you have conversation with people, they tell you something, start observing, or maybe you're already doing it, how quickly one just takes all the words and reacts just to this very thin layer of words, and then passes that story on or something. And one has never really understood. I don't even mean at a very profound level, but at a fairly profound level. So to say, now, wait a minute, what do you mean? What are you saying? What do you mean by this word? So that we can really communicate with each other, so I understand what you're trying to say. Not just take it over. I must be very dumb that I don't understand what he or she is saying, but I don't want to reveal my dumbness. So I just take it over, pass it on. This is how we communicate and converse a lot of the time, maybe most of the time. Look into it, observe it, and try to deepen conversation, communication by questioning together. What do we really mean by what we're saying? Are we just using words very glibly, very superficially, and not really seeing what we're saying? We may be feeling much more profoundly than we're able to express, because we never take the time to first look what we're really feeling, and then groping around for words. May not come out very fluently or eloquently, maybe really groping. So you say to the other person, wait a minute, I got to take some time, just give me some time here to look at this and to really say what I mean. And if you're two friends, you'll wait for each other. You'll be working together in this. So what is a fox? I haven't seen foxes very often. They're very fast, very quick. They may be nocturnal. I've seen a few on the roadside smashed by a car. But there is an abundance of legend in Germany about Reineke Fuchs, the fox, who outwitted all animals. He's so clever. To have to reread it again to see whether there was cleverness with words. Some of it was, I recall, really practical jokes played on other animals. But some of it was wittiness, cleverness. And I recall Roshi talking about the fact that in Japan and China this is known too. Fox being a clever animal, at the same time worshipped, which is not so surprising, because we do worship cleverness. Speaking, cleverness means speaking from sheer intellectual knowledge, this wit that comes out, which has no profundity to it. And yet it comes out very easily. There's a whole backlog of being able to do that. Speaking without really seeing, without really understanding. From what one already knows. So, in this case, the instant this glib answer came out, no, he does not. He doesn't fall under causation. The Enlightenment doesn't. It was already a fox speaking, if we take a fox for that, symbolizing that. I don't think one needs to speak in symbols all the time, but here it's happening, so we're trying to get behind it. There was no need for rebirth. That he was a fox. He spoke not from understanding, not from looking. And apparently that lasted for a long time. No insight, no understanding. Just what was handed down. Tradition. repetition. Apparently this particular fox can change back and forth. Here to Hyakujo, he comes as a man and he implores him. He probably comes just like that monk came to him at one time. He comes, please, relieve me from this life of a fox. It means, is there any possibility for all this memory and knowledge and conditioning to end? To come to a stop? And his specific question is, does the enlightened man fall into causation or not? And Hyakujo says, he doesn't ignore it. Do you understand what it means, not ignoring? It's not a glib word. We can't ignore, we can't afford to ignore anything. Ignoring meaning, I already know what that is, and having a word for it, a name, an explanation, a quick explanation. We are so quick with explanations. Knowing and therefore not bothering to look at it, to concern ourselves with it deeply, directly, right on. In the case of this example which was used earlier, with this person entering the office and bringing with himself or herself this ballast of mood and aggression or resentment, whatever, anger. Not just not ignoring that person, but not ignoring what comes up. But looking and listening and embracing. Not as an idea, not as a moral standard, that's ideas. But because one cannot do otherwise. Anything else is just ignoring. Ignorance. Not knowing and not wanting to know who and what one is, and who and what everyone else is. Hearing this, the old man was at once enlightened. Meaning what? He saw something clearly. Maybe there was no more fox and no more old man and no more abbot. No one. Nothing. But not the idea of no one and nothing. And then, of course, comes the request to have a monk's funeral and so forth. Well, this was said to monks. You see, there's tradition in there. Hyakujo conceded, and they had this funeral. And in this little appendix there, the postlude, you may call it, where one contemporary teacher, Sekida, says what probably happened, Sekida speculation, is Hyakujo found a dead fox someplace and made up this whole story. And now this fox body is being given a burial. In the evening, the master ascended the rostrum and told the monks the whole story. Just throws it out for you to do something with. Maybe to struggle with it, or to become involved in it, to become fascinated by it. But if that's all, that's not enough. What's underneath it? So this one guy here, Obaku, he picks up the ball. Ball is in his court. He picks it up, he throws it back. It's really very beautiful. He says, what if he'd said the right thing right away? Obviously then, Obaku doesn't spell this out, but obviously he wouldn't become a fox according to your story. That was the consequence of giving the wrong answer. He became a fox. What if he'd said the right thing? What would he have become? Which brings in this whole question and problem and idea of becoming. To which we're thoroughly, heavily, profoundly conditioned. Needing to become this or that. In the worldly world, top of the class, top of the department, head of the firm, and in the spiritual world or non-secular world, head monk, head cook, head of the monastery, and then head of many monasteries, and then the Pope. I think I told this story once. It comes up right now, so let me tell you the story. I told it recently, it might have been in Germany, in the Sesshin there, about a little Protestant boy, a little Jewish boy, talking to each other about what they're going to become when they grow up. And there's a Catholic boy and a Jewish boy. And the Catholic boy says, I'm going to go to seminary, I'm going to become a father. And the Jewish boy says, well, what then? What are you going to become then? Well, then I'm going to become a bishop. Well, then what are you going to become? Can you become something else? Oh, yes. After that, I can become a cardinal. Yeah, but then, can you become something else or something more than that? And he says, yeah. After that, I can become the Pope. And the Jewish boy says, what can you become after that? And the little Catholic boy shakes his head. He says, can't become anything after that. After that, there's only God. And the Jewish boy says, you know, one of our boys has made that career. I never understood it for the longest time, because when you're raised as a Lutheran, you don't think that Jesus was Jewish. That's never brought up, particularly when you're raised in Germany at a certain time. So Obaku says, if he had said the right thing, what would he have become? In another version it says, well, then he surely would have become an arhat, a fully enlightened being, and then a bodhisattva, and then a Buddha, and then what? That's another version. I'm not making this up. And Hyakujo says, come here and I'll tell you what he would have become. He doesn't say so much. He says, just come here and I'll tell you. And Obaku just slaps him. At which point the cause does not become an effect. Hyakujo doesn't get mad at this or anything like that. They're of one mind. There's just one mind. There's not Obaku and Hyakujo. There's just nothing there. No becoming. Becoming is thinking. Endless thinking with endless frustrations. endless ambition and disappointments and sorrow and mutual competition and rivalry and war and killing. That's what becoming all entails as a cause. The idea of becoming. So Obaku just slaps him and Hyakuja just claps his hands and says some kind of a thing there about red beards and foreigners with red beards. It doesn't mean a thing. It means there's no you and no me, no beard and no foreigner there. Because there's no becoming. So all these ideas of becoming drop, and it's a possibility for opening up to what is. Not knowing what is, by word or name or explanation. Just mu or who or what is it or what is this? I've lost track of time, but I think our time is up. We'll continue with a commentary in verse tomorrow.